Hey guys, David here, and today we are talking about the newly announced 2020 iPad Air. This was just announced at the September 2020 Apple event. Now my first impression was, damn, that looks pretty awesome, but you're stealing a lot of tricks from the iPad Pro. So today we are going to do a quick comparison. What are the key differences between the new iPad Air and the 2020 iPad Pro, and which is the best one for you to buy? Now I have the 2020 iPad Pro right here, and I'm a big fan. So stick around and see if this new Air would have made me change my purchase decision. And wait until the end for full conclusions and a buyer's guide. Ready? Then let's go. To make this comparison easier to follow, I've broken things out into 5 categories. Category 1 is design. So with the updated design, the iPad Air is very similar to the iPad Pro, especially the 11-inch model. Both now have the all-screen design with slim bezels and flat edges, very sexy. The new iPad Air also gets previously iPad Pro exclusive features. We now have Apple Pencil 2 compatibility, including the very cool magnetic attachment and charging, and the previously iPad Pro exclusive USB-C port makes its way to these new iPad Airs. Now for design differences. The new iPad Air gets Touch ID integrated into the top power and sleep button, unlike the Pro, which has FaceID. Now FaceID is a little bit slicker, but if like me you are left-handed, then oftentimes I'll pick up the device like this, inadvertently cover the camera, and the speed of FaceID is straight away lost. So I actually think Touch ID would be pretty cool. The screen of the new Air is 10.9 inches, almost identical to the 11-inch iPad Pro, and with all the other specs being identical except for ProMotion. This is where the iPad Pro can alter its refresh rate depending on what you're doing with it, all the way up to 120 Hz for a very smooth experience. The iPad Air does not have this. Now, a lot of tech people on YouTube think that 120 Hz refresh rates are super important, and it's nice, but honestly, when I go between my iPad Pro and a device like the iPhone, which can only do a 60 Hz refresh rate, I really don't notice that much of a difference. So your mileage might vary, but I don't think that's a big reason to spend the extra money on the Pro on its own. In terms of audio, both the Air and the Pro now have stereo audio in landscape mode. However, the Pro has 4 speakers compared to just 2 in the Air. So I expect the Air will sound good, but it's probably not going to be quite as loud or quite as rich and detailed as the audio you will get listening to the Pro. And last but by no means least is the color options. So the Air has the space gray and the silver option that you can get on the iPad Pro, but also adds rose gold, green and sky blue. Now for me, I need everything to match, so I've ended up with kind of boring space gray across all my Apple devices, but on their own, those new colors look pretty damn cool. So if that's something you care about, it is an advantage to the new iPad Air. Category number 2. This is all about power and performance. The iPad Pro is still a performance beast with similar or superior performance to many mid and higher range machines. Using the Pro every day for nearly 6 months now, it has still never missed a beat and still surprises me with how good it is. Now excitingly, the new A14 chip in the iPad Air is supposed to be up to 40% faster for CPU performance and 30% faster for graphics performance. We can see on screen what this comparison means. If we use Geekbench for some artificial benchmarks, the iPad Pro performance is around 4600, and if we add 40% to the iPad Air previous generation, we get to around 4000. So, while the previous Air was around 40% slower in performance than the Pro, the new one is within 13%, and I suspect while some difference might be noticeable in real-world applications, I think more often than not it's going to be a very similar, very smooth experience that you get with the Air. If we do a similar comparison for graphics performance using the Geekbench Metal benchmark, we see that the iPad Pro does retain a big advantage here with a score of nearly 10,500 compared to the iPad Air, where the previous generation was around 4650. If we add 30% to that, we get to around 6,000. So a big improvement, but still 40% or more behind the top of the line iPad Pro. So if you're somebody who uses very graphics intensive applications or does a lot of gaming, the iPad Pro could still be a superior option for you. So overall, and unsurprisingly, the iPad Pro is still the king when it comes to power and performance. And if you need the absolute most out of your machine, if you're using your iPad as a big, major creative workflow computer, then you may well see a noticeable day-to-day advantage in the Pro. But if you're doing those things infrequently with a bit less intensity, or you're doing creative stuff that is not quite as overbearing, then I suspect the iPad Air is going to be more than powerful enough for your day-to-day needs, and therefore could well represent better value for you than the Pro. It's also worth noting that the A14 is going to very likely be the chip that we get in the iPhone 12. Now, based off those artificial benchmarks, you're getting performance which is better than a laptop at around £850, that being approximately the cost of the cheapest iPad Air plus the Magic Keyboard for that laptop experience. But that sort of performance in a smartphone, firstly, wow, and secondly, that suggests that the new Apple Silicon chips we are going to be getting in Macs very soon are going to be pretty damn impressive. You want to know more about Apple Silicon and get my analysis? Check out the video. Category number 3, cameras. Who cares about iPad cameras? Good question, but it's worth bringing out because a few people do, and it's also one of the only areas where these devices have got a lot of differences. The Air and the Pro both now have the same wide-angle 12 megapixel sensor. Literally will be identical for most photos, and for video, it's got the same features. However, the Pro gets a number of extras. First, it gets a second rear-facing camera, a ultra-wide 10 megapixel, which is great for very wide landscapes and is just nice as an extra angle to be able to have. The Pro also gets a flash, making it more flexible and superior in low light situations. Both the Air and the Pro get a 7 megapixel front-facing camera which can record video at up to 1080p, the rear cameras being capable of 4K at up to 60 frames per second. But there is an additional true depth camera array set up on the Pro, which enables you to do not only Face ID, as we talked about earlier, but also facilitates portrait mode. So if you want to have those artificial blurry background pictures on your iPad, then the Pro is the only way to get that. Just before we get to our final 2 categories and conclusions, thanks for making it this far through the video. If it's helpful and interesting, please like. And if you like content like this, tech, reviews, as well as tips on video, photography, music, then please subscribe and check out the other content on the channel. Thank you. Category number 4, the penultimate one before we get towards our conclusion, is about other features and storage. So the cheapest iPad Air comes with 64 gigs and is configurable at up to 256 gigs compared to the Pro, which starts at 128. So when you're comparing those base prices, bear in mind the value isn't quite as favorable to the Air because it comes with half as much storage. Now, my personal recommendation would be if you're using an iPad as a companion device like I do, I wouldn't worry too much about storage. And if you're using it as a real workhorse, I would personally think, can you use cloud storage or expandable SSDs or hard drives? Because they're likely going to be quite a lot cheaper and more flexible than spending extra on the internal storage unless you really need it. 2 more features to cover. The iPad Pro has a LiDAR scanner, which is somewhere in this little section here at the back. That is basically something that allows for very accurate measurement of distances in space. That could be really useful for future augmented reality. Personally, I've never used that, and if it catches on, great, but there's a good chance it will never be used. However, I have been using the LiDAR scanner with the Measure app, which really improves the accuracy, and it's great for what I've been doing, testing whether you can fit furniture in different places, moving things around, and trying to spruce up the boring kind of lockdown flat that I've become accustomed to. So there is a little bit of value in that. The last feature in my other category is Magic Keyboard compatibility. Previously this was only for the iPad Pro, but now the Magic Keyboard will work just fine with the new iPad Air. Now personally, I wouldn't recommend the Magic Keyboard on the basis of its price unless you're using an iPad as your only computing device. However, if the Magic Keyboard is something you care about, then the Air is now on equal footing with the Pro. Which brings us to category number 5. Value and conclusions. So there is around a £200 difference between each increment of iPad Air to iPad Pro. We've got the Air at $579, then the 11-inch, almost identical sized Pro for $769, then the larger 12.9-inch iPad Pro at $969. So what does that mean for value? Now, if you're going to be really pushing the bleeding edge of performance, then you already know that the iPad Pro is what you're going to need. However, things are now so close that I would suggest if you don't have one already, maybe it's better to wait, because it could be that the next iPad Pro is even more powerful. One advantage the Pro can offer that the Air can't compete with is that highest configuration 12.9-inch screen. I do genuinely find this quite helpful. However, if that is the big thing for you, you already know that you need the largest iPad Pro. So if you're comparing 10.9 or 11-inch tablets and that size issue isn't key, the Air honestly looks like it could be better value for most people, unless you know that you really need that bleeding edge firepower, especially the extra graphics muscle, or if you really care about the remaining Pro exclusive features like ProMotion, like the better camera. So that's all. I hope it was helpful, and I would love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please do me a huge favor and drop a like. If you liked the video and you'd like to see more things like tech reviews, analysis, tips and tutorials on photography, videography, and music, then please subscribe and tune in for more content. Until next time, a huge thank you for watching, and take it easy.